Handstand push-ups. Let's talk about why we do them, and let's talk about how we can progress from doing a simple push-up even from your knees, and how to build the strength up to getting strict handstand push-ups and kipping handstand push-ups that you can do in our CrossFit WODs. So why do we do them? Why do we do these tricky gymnastics maneuvers that don't have an exact one-to-one ratio with something that we might do in the real world? It doesn't mimic anything that we find ourselves doing in our day-to-day. Well, it's not necessarily about functional movement. It's not necessarily about an exact mimic of something that we might encounter in our day-to-day life. With functional movements, we're trying to work core to extremity, so using our big muscles together before we rely on our little muscles. So using our abs, obliques, chest, shoulders before we go out to our extremities, and using our biceps, triceps. Same thing, we're not going to try to isolate a little muscle in our quads. We're going to try to use quads, hamstrings, and glutes in combination with our core when we're doing lower body exercises. So for these tricky gymnastics maneuvers, it's about body awareness and how to use your body appropriately to get from either point A to point B, or to basically go through a full range of motion. So for this today, what we're going to do is build some midline stability, some shoulder strength, and then finish it out with our triceps. And then when we get into the kipping handstand push-up, it's about taking momentum from our lower body, from our hips and our knees, and transferring it into our upper body so that we can get more work done in a small amount of time. Just like we do with a barbell when we're doing push press or something similar to that. Now, we need to make sure, because of the position of the handstand, since we are going to be inverted, we are putting a little bit of pressure on our head and our neck. We want to make sure that we have the strength before we do this. Sometimes we can get away with getting kipping pull-ups before strict pull-ups, as long as you have the shoulder strength and stability to support that range of motion and that movement for pull-ups. That's okay in my opinion. However, handstand push-ups, we need to make sure that at no point are we crashing on the top of our head, or are we resting with 100% of our weight on our head, even when you're tired. So let's say you're doing one of the open workouts recently that had, I believe it was 55 handstand push-ups before you moved on. We should not be coming to a resting point on our head and shaking our arms out. We should make sure that we're either engaged in our lats and shoulders still, or we're completely kicking down. So if you don't have the strength to support yourself, a majority on your shoulders and in your lats, very little actually resting on your head and neck, then we don't need to be doing this. And I'm talking full range of motion too. So sometimes we'll allow some accessory work and some strength work, doing limited range motion, but that should never come into a CrossFit WOD where we're trying to go quickly. We need to make sure that we have the strength in the full range of motion. So starting from the bottom level, working our way up, we're going to start with push-ups. And then we're going to get through some seated dumbbell press, and then we'll work our way up to the strict push-up, handstand push-ups up against the wall, and then I'll talk about the kipping position and how to implement that into your handstand push-up. So the first method, if you cannot do a basic push-up from your knees or from your feet, then we don't need to go anywhere else from there. So pretty simple stuff. We need to make sure that we're keeping our core tight. And not going straight down. We're not treating this like a burpee. This needs to be a strict push-up. So I'll try to back up here so you can see my hands on the floor. We need to make sure that we got our hands about shoulder width apart. They should be hands should be underneath your elbows, elbows underneath your shoulders, all the way down. Notice I'm not breaking at the knees and hips, so I'm not letting my knees go down. I'm not flopping up and down, kind of like how we do for a burpee. Straight down, straight up. Now, if you need to go from your knees, that's perfectly fine. You've heard me say in class, I would rather you get your knees elevated so that we keep your hips up off the ground. But same thing here. We're making sure that we're not just flopping, up and down like we do for a burpee. So making sure you've got push-ups before we move on is key here. Now, seated dumbbell press. Why do we do this seated? One, it takes away any possible advantage you might get from your legs. So sometimes we get tired and we'll get a slight bend in the knee. We'll get a little bit of help from our knees and from our lower body. We don't want that. We want to isolate shoulders. It's also going to make us activate our midline. So we're going to feel it in our abs. We're going to feel it a little bit in our hip flexors as well. It's going to simulate what we're going to do up against the wall when we're doing handstand push-ups. So we're going to take these dumbbells, full range of motion again. So we need to make sure that the dumbbells are touching our shoulders at the bottom. Just one head is fine. All the way up, all the way down. You can see I kind of have to push my head forward a little bit to keep my, to keep my torso upright. Really try to avoid leaning back and turning this into a bench press. That's not the purpose here. We need to go for vertical presses here. This would be step 2. So doing big sets, building strength in your shoulders, and using the dumbbells as opposed to a barbell is really going to work those stabilizers, the unilateral strength. So we're going to make sure that we're hitting all of the muscles in your shoulder girdle to make sure that you can support yourself when you're upside down. Now those are the most basic things there. I'll roll these dumbbells out of the way. Now we're going to get into the tripod push-up or the pike push-up and how we should be positioning our head on the floor. It's going to be similar to a down dog position, depending on your strength. Move your feet forward and backward. Think about, reducing the angle or increasing the angle at your hips. But what the most important thing here, so we're going to get our hips up nice and high. I've got my feet wide just for balance purposes, but notice where my head touches the floor. It's going to come down. It's going to be slightly in front of my hands. Now as I press back up, the entire time I can look left and right without moving my head and I can still see my hands. Sometimes you'll see people, they'll put their hands way back behind their head. That's essentially trying to do a strict press with weights way back behind your head with, say, for example, a barbell. We really want to avoid that. That's going to put extra stress on your rotator cuff and on the back of your neck or on the back of your head. And basically, we don't want to do that. We want to keep our head in front of our hands. We want to be able to look left and right without moving our head and still see our hands. And notice also where I'm touching the floor with my head. So it's kind of like if you think about if you're playing soccer and you give the soccer ball head. So forehead, high on the forehead, crown of your head, not way back here, not on top of this guy. That's why I can still wear this up when I'm doing handstand push-ups. So crown of your head right here, maybe high on the forehead. That is where you want to make contact with the ground. And pretty simple, just lower yourself down, touch the floor, come back up. Now these need to be in control just like everything else from this point on. We need to make sure we're not crashing down into the floor. A couple other things you notice that just like when we do regular push-ups, you want to, at the very most, make your elbows create an arrow. So you guys can see that now in the video. So making an arrow, at no point should you be making a T with your arms. If your arms are out here, way too much stress on your rotator cuff, it's going to hurt your shoulders. So keeping yourself at an arrow, or even better, keeping them in front. Just like we would do for a push press, when those elbows are kind of right in front of you, going straight up and straight down. Now if they flare out a little bit, like I said, that's all right, but no wider than an arrow, nowhere near making a T. Now how do we make this one a little bit harder? We bring a box or something like that into the picture, and we're gonna get our feet elevated a little bit. So getting into an elevated plank, you can walk your hands back as much as you'd like to get into another pike position. So this right here is pretty inverted. I can definitely feel this in my hamstrings. You may not be able to get to this position, but you just basically you want to make it challenging for your arms and your shoulders. Same thing, lower yourself down. I can still see my hands, and then back up. There you go. Now, you might have noticed it there, especially because it became a little bit hard for me to talk. As I bring my head down and I touch the floor, again, at no point am I completely resting on my head. I still have a lot of tension in my shoulders, a lot of tension in my lats. You want to make sure that at no point are you completely resting on your head. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit tricky here. So we need to make sure that we can get upside down up against the wall. There's two ways to do this. The preferred method is just to kick up so that you're facing away from the wall. You're going to kick up and you're going to hold, and before you progress, you should be able to hold this for at least 30 seconds. So here's an example of that. So kicking up, just hanging out here, keeping my elbows straight, actively pressing down into the floor. And then whenever I'm ready, I can lower myself down. Now, we want to make sure, like I said, we're actively pressing down into the floor. You also want to make sure that midline is tight. So sometimes, for example, when we've got a heavy barbell overhead, some of us will have a tendency to overextend our back. We can't have that here either. We got to make sure that core is tight and that body is straight. So kicking up into a 30-second handstand hold is a good way to go. You can also, if you're not quite ready to completely kick up against the wall with that kind of aggressive kick forward, you can do a wall walk and hold the inverted position from there. If you're unfamiliar with that wall walk, right now, if you can't see it, my feet are flat up against the wall. I'm in the push-up position. So I'm going to do a push-up, get my feet up against the wall, and then just walk my hands back until I'm completely inverted, and then just hang out here for 30 seconds. Now when you're doing it this way, just be safe with how you come down. Don't come crashing down on your toes. We don't need any broken toes or anything like that. If you're going to do the wall walk method, do not progress into the handstand push-ups until you're able to kick up, facing away from the wall like you did in that first example. That is how we're going to do handstand push-ups. So you need to be comfortable kicking up against this wall. Make sure you're doing it up against the cinder block, not against the drywall. That way you don't have to worry about going into the building next door or anything like that. Now, like I mentioned earlier, strict strength is required before we go to kipping. So there's a couple different ways to build strict strength. I'll show you an example of a full strict handstand push-up. Notice how my core is tight. I'm not using any kind of hip or knee bend to help me get all the way up to the top of the rack. Now, if you're not quite there, how do we get there? Well, bring the dumbbells back into the situation. Do seated dumbbell press, or if you can do strict press, if you can keep your knees out of it, that is another way to build strict pressing strength. Now, if you've got the handstand hold, you're really close to doing strict handstand push-ups, or maybe you just can't get the lockout or something like that, let's go with some negatives. This is a way to build strength, something you should do before or after class. We're not going to do these in a workout. But this would be a 3 to 5 second negative rep right here. So slowing down the descent, and then as soon as your head touches the mat, kick down, and then reset. These would be a great way to build that strength. Now, when we're ready, when we've got 1 to 3 strict reps, then we can talk about doing the kip motion. We want to make sure that we have control on the way down for the kip. We want to make sure that we've got the strength to support ourselves in our arms and our lats and not on our head and neck. And we're basically going to start by getting into a frog position, and we can do that out on the floor away from the wall. Let me get this box out of the way a little bit. So if you were any good at that in phys ed when you were younger, maybe like 2nd or 3rd grade, when we're really working on body awareness when we're children, we probably got into some headstands. I myself was not very good at them. I fell all over the place. But this is a good way to start and get used to the bottom position of the kick. So again, we're going to start with that good tripod stance, so I can still see my hands in my peripheral. And now we're just going to hop up. And so notice the position of my legs. Woo, wobbling a bit there because I had a lot of tension in my shoulders. So notice the position of my legs. We're bending at the knees and the hips. Sometimes when we're new to kipping handstand push-ups, we'll try to rush it. We get a little bit of a bend in our knees, then we kick right back up, and we're essentially doing a wobbly kipping handstand push-up, a wobbly strict handstand push-up. We want to make sure, just like when we're doing a push press or something like that with weight, we get that bend in our hips and knees, and then we'll use both our hips and our knees to drive, create some momentum and drive the barbell or the dumbbells up overhead. Same thing here. We want to create a lot of power through our hips and knees, transfer that momentum into our upper body. So practice getting into that frog stance a couple times before you go over to the wall, just so you're familiar with how much you're bending at the hips and at the knees. So we basically want to get kind of like how we do with an air squat. We want to be able to get this past the point of being parallel with the floor. Now, notice how I'm going to do the same thing here that I did with the 3-second negatives. I'm going to kick up, lower myself down, head's going to tap the floor. I'm keeping tension in my arms, and then I'm going to get into that frog stance, or that, the bottom of the kip. When you're doing this up against the wall, your tailbone or your butt should touch the wall when you're in the bottom of the kip. If it's not, you're off balance, you're gonna end up shooting up. When you're ready to go for your handstand push-ups, you'll kick up and you'll come away from the wall. So in the bottom, make sure your tailbone or your butt touches the wall and you get into that good, that full kip, bending at the hips and the knees. So it's going to look like this. Once you reach the bottom, go ahead and kick down and reset. Oh, I lost my glasses there. Sorry, let me do that one again. Okay, so you can see I got all the way to the bottom. I lowered myself, bent at the lower body, bending at the hips, bending at the knees, getting into that position, felt comfortable, kick down and reset. Now what we need to do is think about reversing that. So we're gonna slowly lower ourselves down, get into the bottom of the kip, and then shoot our legs up, try to transfer that momentum into our arms. This might take might take some time to get used to the movement pattern. You know, we're used to really driving weight up overhead. It's gonna feel a little bit weird because you don't have the floor to press against with your legs. You're kind of just kicking up into open air. But give yourself some time before you dive into your first WOD to try this 2, 3, 4, plenty of sets of reps strung together before you try to do this against the clock. So I'll show you a couple examples right here of the kipping handstand push-up. Woo! So that right there is the progression from push-ups, seated dumbbell press, handstand holds, strict handstand push-ups, and then finally, kipping handstand push-ups. This is something that I'd be happy to work with any of you guys on, helping you build strength, creating a plan. If you've got any questions, you know how to find me. Again, this is one we need to make sure we've got the strength. We can do everything strict before we do it kipping in the CrossFit WOD. It's a lot of fun, just like the ring muscle ups. It's something that even if you don't think you can get, all it takes is a lot of, it just takes some effort, building some strength, and you'll get there. Let's have some fun. Let's get these.